All right, guys. So yesterday, Kamala Harris went on a CNN town hall that I believe was originally supposed to be a debate with Trump, but Trump didn't want to do that. So it turned into a town hall. And we're going to go ahead and watch through some of the major clips that have been floating around and try to analyze how Kamala did. I mean, we're only, 2 and a bit weeks out from the election itself. So this is crunch time, final pitch. What do you have to say to the American people? This first one is on Trump's border wall. Now, I'll show you guys after this clip what Kamala previously said about Trump's border wall, but let's listen to her try to pivot to the right on the issue of immigration here.
Is a border wall stupid?
Well, let's talk about Donald Trump and that border wall. So remember, Donald Trump said Mexico would pay for it? Come on, they didn't. How much of that wall did he build? I think the last number I saw was about 2%. And then when it came time for him to do a photo op, you know where he did it? In the part of the wall that President Obama built.
But you're agreeing to a bill that would earmark $650 million to continue building that wall.
I pledge that I am going to bring forward that bipartisan bill to further strengthen and secure our border. Yes, I am. And I'm going to work across the aisle to pass a comprehensive bill that deals with a broken immigration system. I think Jackson's question, part of it was to acknowledge that America has always had migration, but there needs to be a legal process for it. People have to earn it. And that's the point that I think is the most important point that can be made, which is we need a president who is grounded in common sense and practical outcomes. Like, let's just fix this thing. Let's just fix it. Why is there any ideological perspective on it? Let's just fix the problem.
To fix the problem, you're doing this compromise bill. It does call for $650 million that was earmarked under Trump to actually still go to build the wall.
I'm not afraid of good ideas where they occur.
So you don't think it's stupid anymore?
I think what he did and how he did it did not make much sense because he actually didn't do much of anything. I just talked about that wall, right? We just talked about it. He didn't actually do much of anything.
Okay, so what's going on here? Are we pro-Trump border wall? Are we anti-Trump border wall? I mean, just to give you guys a comparison in terms of where Kamala was a few short years ago, here from Axios. Flashback, in declaring her candidacy in the first run for president in 2019, Harris called the wall of Trump's medieval vanity project. That's what she called it. That wasn't going to stop transnational gangs from entering the U.S. In February of 2020, Harris wrote on Facebook that, quote, Trump's border wall is a complete waste of taxpayer money and won't make us any safer. In April of 2017, soon after joining the Senate, Harris said that the wall was a stupid use of money and I will block any funding for it. So that was Kamala under the Trump administration. This is Kamala, after being subbed in when Biden dropped out for the 2024 Democratic nomination. So what's going on here? I mean, what exactly is Kamala Harris's position on immigration? I mean, there were some things sprinkled in there. She says she wants to have, immigrants prove themselves is the verbiage that she used to, have some sort of a pathway to become American citizens. But I mean, she's making fun of Trump's border wall, but it seems like she's making fun of it not in the same way that she did under Trump's presidency, which was to say, I think accurately at the time, that it was a complete waste of taxpayer money. It's not going to actually make Americans safer, et cetera, et cetera. And now she's saying it was a failure of Trump's because he didn't actually follow through on building the border wall. I mean, those are two completely different things that we're discussing here. So, I mean, Anderson try to get some sort of a clarification there. But I think at the end of the day, what this comes down to is Kamala doesn't necessarily really believe in anything, right? Let's try to be real about this, okay? She's changed her position drastically from under the Trump administration when she was a senator of California to being a Democratic, nominee in the primary in 2020 to being the actual Democratic nominee for president in 2024, she's changed her position multiple times because she doesn't have a core belief on this. She's trying to say what she thinks is the most effective rhetoric for her to potentially win this election. That's what she's saying here. There is no underpinning, ideological or philosophical or policy framework, behind this answer here. She's just trying to not piss off right-leaning independents or, anti-Trump Republicans who don't like immigration, while simultaneously trying to provide some sort of a narrow pathway there for pro-immigration activists or voters in this country to continue to support her. So a bizarre answer on that question. Now, we follow up here on the issue of inflation and high prices for American consumers. Let's go ahead and watch this one here.
Let me just ask you about price gouging. I looked at your plan. You talk about going after price gougers, and I'm quoting from the plan, on essential goods during emergencies or times of crisis. I get that. How does that help, though, someone like Eric with prices that for years the grocery prices just been high?
Well, first of all, Anderson, as you know, and obviously CNN has been covering extensively what has been happening in the state of Georgia, North Carolina, Florida. It's a real issue. I was Attorney General of California. I was the top law enforcement officer of the biggest state in the country. I took this issue on because it affects a lot of people. And I'm not going to apologize for the fact that we need to actually deal with accountability when these, not all, in fact, most don't, but when companies are taking advantage of the desperation and the need of the American people. We saw it actually during the pandemic as well, where because of supply chain issues, there was a reduction of supply, and then they would inflate the price of everyday necessities. Not to mention, by the way, again, Donald Trump should be here tonight to talk with you and answer your questions. He's not. He refused to come. But understand that part of his plan is to put in place a national sales tax of at least 20% on everyday goods and necessities. And that, by economist estimates, independent economists, would cost you as the American consumer and taxpayer an additional $4,000 a year.
I want you to...
Okay, so sort of two different parts to that answer there. Number one is she's questioned about her, policy idea of going after corporate price gougers, that it seems like when she first replaced Biden as the Democratic nominee, she was, hammering home on and really making that a central part of her messaging. And then Republicans called her a communist and created all of this fear mongering around it. And even though it's an incredibly popular idea to go after corporate price gougers, they sort of backed off of that in their messaging. But in terms of her analysis of especially during the pandemic and onward, corporations in the United States artificially increasing prices, using this narrative of, inflation in order to jack up prices while American consumers are suffering and they are reaping record profits. That analysis is true, right? So going after those corporate price gougers is great. That's both good policy and that's good politics. Then she transitions to talking about a 20% sales tax. I think what she's talking about there is Trump's idea to do sort of like blanket tariffs on entire American industries. And of course, Trump doesn't really understand how tariffs work. And so he doesn't think that that's going to lead to drastic inflation. It absolutely will. So I think that she's right about, at least in part, both of those different sections of that answer that she was giving there. I wish that she would go a little bit harder in terms of describing the specific ways that she would go about confronting price gouging corporations. Is she talking about a windfall profits tax? Is she talking about, using the DOJ to go after corporations for potentially, fraudulent activities during emergencies? Or what exactly are you actually talking about when it comes to that issue? But so that was her answer there on that topic. Now we get to what I think was probably the worst aspect of this entire town hall. So here we have Kamala Harris giving her standard response whenever she is asked about anything in regards to Israel or Gaza or Lebanon or the Middle East in general. Let's go ahead and watch this question here.
The question is, as president, what would you do to ensure not another Palestinian dies due to bombs being funded by U.S. tax dollars?
So I will say, and I think this is to your point, far too many innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed. It's unconscionable. And we are now at a place where with Sinwar's death, I do believe we have an opportunity to end this war, bring the hostages home, bring relief to the Palestinian people, and work toward a two-state solution where Israel and the Palestinians in equal measure have security, where the Palestinian people have dignity, self-determination, and the safety that they so rightly deserve.
Okay, so she's really, really good at pulling out meaningless platitudes from her ass. She's great at that. She's really good at that. right? In terms of rhetoric, if you knew absolutely nothing about what Israel has done over the last year, or let's say over the last like 6, 7 decades, if you didn't know anything about what's going on right now, you would look at that answer and say, that's great, right? Peace and dignity and security for Israelis and Palestinians alike, and a two-state solution, and we're going to resolve this conflict finally. You would think that's amazing. Now, when you get down to the actual reality of this kind of an answer, what are we talking about here? The United States is not some sort of a passive observer to this conflict. We are the primary weapons supplier for one side of this conflict. Okay? If we cut off the weapons to Israel, if we even suggested, maybe even behind the scenes, that there was some sort of jeopardy to the U.S.-Israeli relationship, or that we wouldn't continue to fund and to arm and to give them diplomatic cover on the world stage, we could end this in one day. We could have ended this months and months and months ago if we chose to. The reality is the Biden-Harris administration have chosen not to. We have continued to run cover for Israel. We have continued to send them weapons, even though it is against not only international law, but also U.S. law, and also against the wishes of the vast majority of the American people. This answer, when you actually have been keeping up with what Israel has been doing over the last year, is utterly and completely meaningless. It does not mean anything. She might as well have answered this question of what will you do, right? This was the original question. What will you do to make sure that Palestinians are not continuing to be killed by U.S. weapons? She may as well have turned around to this person and said, nothing. I will do nothing. Because that's what her answer actually meant here, right? Now, it was a great question by this person. Unfortunately, Kamala didn't have any sort of, realistic answer to the question. She keeps talking about a two-state solution as if Israel is not continuing to expand their illegal settlements in the West Bank, as if they aren't doing a full-blown ethnic cleansing of North Gaza right now, as if they haven't rendered massive portions of Gaza completely uninhabitable by the Palestinian population that has been displaced there. This should not be a complicated issue, guys. This is not a difficult question to answer. Again, it's good policy and good politics to be in favor of an arms embargo. It's supported by a vast majority of the American people, and it's also simply following in line with U.S. and international law. This should not be a difficult issue, but she makes it a difficult issue. Now, you guys tell me why that may be. We move on here. We also have a follow-up here on the same issue where Kamala Harris, pretends to care about the amount of Palestinian civilians that have been killed throughout the last year of this genocide here.
What do you say to voters who are thinking about supporting a third-party candidate or staying on the couch, not voting at all because of this issue?
Listen, I am not going to deny the strong feelings that people have. I don't know that anyone who has seen the images who would not have strong feelings about what has happened, much less those who have relatives who have died and been killed. And I know people and have talked with people. So I appreciate that. But I also do know that for many people who care about this issue, they also care about bringing down the price of groceries. They also care about our democracy and not having a president of the United States who admires dictators and is a fascist.
Okay, so basically her argument in this clip is, yes, there have been many, specifically Arab Americans who have directly lost family members. And yes, there are people who are outraged about what's happening right now, but you care about other issues. So vote for me because you care about, reducing the cost of everyday necessities, or, you care about protecting democracy from the fascist authoritarian threat of Trump. Okay, that's an argument. I mean, there are probably many people out there who may buy into that argument, right? Maybe Israel and Gaza isn't your top issue and, grocery prices are your top issue, or protecting democracy is your top issue. That's a way to approach this. But again, when I'm listening to a clip like this or the one before, and she says things like, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed, I wonder what she actually means by that. Because At the same time that she's saying too many innocent Palestinians have been killed, she's also saying that Israel is perfectly following in accordance with international law and that they are engaging in a campaign of self-defense, not a campaign of extermination, but a campaign of self-defense. Those two things are contradictory to me. So your foreign policy approach makes absolutely no goddamn sense whatsoever. I guess, again, it's some sort of a strategy to just sort of deflect away from that and say, please don't make that your top issue and make these other things that in many cases are real issues, like, Trump's authoritarian threat and threat to democracy, etc. You can make that argument. I think it's a pretty risky argument, given, some of the significant populations, not just Arab Americans, but Americans in general who care about our government actively supporting a genocide. I think that may be a bigger factor than you're letting on here, but I guess that's a strategy to answer this question. Will it work? I guess we'll have to see in a couple of weeks from now. Now, we also have this here. Kamala Harris asked what I think is a pretty simple, layup question here of, what are your weaknesses, right? What mistakes have you made over the last number of years that you'd like to talk about? Here was part of her answer to this.
I don't think I've ever heard the former president admit a mistake. A lot of politicians don't. Is there something you can point to in your life, political life or in your life in the last 4 years, that you think is a mistake that you have learned from?
I mean, I've made many mistakes. And they range from, if you've ever parented a child, you make lots of mistakes too. In my role as vice president, I mean, I've probably worked very hard at making sure that I am well versed on issues, and I think that is very important. It's a mistake not to be well versed on an issue and feel compelled to answer a question.
What? What was that? She basically just tried to pull the classic, when you're in a job interview or something, and you're asked what are your greatest weaknesses? And you say something like, well, I actually work too hard. That's my greatest weakness, right? That's the kind of answer that she just pulled there. I mean, I guess you make mistakes as a parent. I guess that could be a valid answer to many people. I don't know. It was interesting to me that, I think it was a classic example here of Kamala Harris moving into her, I don't know where I'm going with the end of this sentence kind of strategy, and I'm just going to kind of ramble and hope that I get to somewhere. But here we have, to finish off, David Axelrod, obviously former, very close to Obama advisor here. And he kind of called out Kamala Harris for her platitudes, for her vagueness, and how she sort of waffles on answers that she's uncomfortable with. Let's listen to this final clip here.
When she doesn't want to answer a question, her habit is to kind of go to word salad city, and she did that on a couple of answers. One was on Israel. Anderson asked a direct question, would you be stronger on Israel than Trump? And there was a 7-minute answer, but none of it related to the question he was asking.
I mean, he's right. He is right. Now, listen, I get it to some extent. Many of these topics are very uncomfortable for her because, number one, again, she doesn't really know what she believes in. And number two, she doesn't want to sort of piss off either side of the equation. She was, plopped into the situation where Biden dropped out of the election. She became the presumptive nominee. She's now leading the ticket. And there were, only a couple months out when that happened from the election. And so she didn't want to make any big waves. Let's take the safest approach that we can possibly think of. And to her, at least with her and her strategist interpretations, the safest approach to them is to basically run a center-right campaign, right? So we're going to spin to the right on fracking, we're going to spin to the right on immigration, we're going to spin to the right on foreign policy, and rely on the fact that people largely in this country, or at least to some extent, don't like Donald Trump. That's basically, it seems like, the strategy that Kamala is going with right now. So listen, can she pull it off? It's possible. It's possible. I mean, it's at this point, I still think a 50-50. Maybe I would give it a 51 to 49% chance that Trump ends up winning this election. My gut, personally, says that Trump is going to win, but it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Kamala ends up, pulling this out in the end of the day. So there you have it, guys. Again, I mean, I've given you my rundown before. I think if Kamala loses, the main factors will be that she refused to break from Joe Biden and didn't make herself the change candidate. Number two being she refused to break from the Israeli genocide in Gaza, as well as their escalations with Lebanon and with Iran. And, thirdly would be that she is not focusing nearly enough on economic left-wing policy. If Trump loses, it's, I think, going to be largely because he appointed the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade. That's probably going to be a key issue in this election. Number two, obviously people are sick of Donald Trump and the chaos that he brings to the presidency. And, there are a few other reasons as well. Obviously, there are some other stories floating around at the moment of, former generals and top Trump staffers who have said that, Trump has claimed that he wanted Hitler's generals, and they've called him a fascist and other, pretty, I think, serious and real allegations from some people who were very close to Trump in the previous years. But, at this point, again, my broad scopes analysis of this election is that it's not a heated race where, you have two incredible competitors who are running amazing campaigns and it's coming down to the wire who's going to edge the other one out. It's really more a race to the bottom. Who's running the worst campaign? Who are Americans more sick of? Who do Americans, least want to be the president? And that could potentially be the deciding factor. So I'll keep you guys updated next couple of days, next couple of weeks. It's going to be crunch time. We're going to have to keep on top of all of this and see what the final pitches are from both of these absolutely horrendous candidates.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying